I'm Sleep Aid, your local sleep paralysis demon, and today we will be taking a look at 10 more entries in the Webtoon Legends contest. As you know, I made this call on the Webtoon Canvas subreddit for contest entries to review, and I have been making my way through them 10 at a time, reviewing them based on how well they are paced and how well they act as an introduction to their series, as a pitch for their series as entries in the contest. And so we are going to be taking a look today at Bummer Buster, Time Tangled, To Her Death, Rainy Day, The Pillar, Supercat, Fallen One, Crystal Rose, Returned, and LOR'YAH. Now, again, I want to reiterate that I am reviewing these based on their entrance into the Webtoon Legends contest, and so I'm not looking at these as series as a whole. I'm looking at them from the perspective that a judge might look at them as entries in the contest. I'm looking at them, judging them based on how well they set up the premise of the series and how well they build expectations for what the comic might be about if it were to be extended as an original. So, let's go ahead and take a look at our first series today, Bummer Buster, The Rat and the Recluse. This is an action fantasy by Strawbisky. Let's go ahead and read the description and then I'll talk a little bit about it. So, after manifesting an entity known as an Archfiend, the young Strudel Retzot is pressed into the Warden Corps. For his first assignment, he must investigate the claims made by the sole survivor of a routine mission gone wrong. Now, immediately you might notice that his last name, Retsaut, is toaster backward. Every character in the series has a breakfast-themed name like this, which is some kind of anagram or reversal, and I think the implication is that the author just kind of made a throwaway concept to submit for the contest without having any real strings attached to it, which is probably a good idea considering Webtoon claims the rights to everything that's entered in this contest. So do bear that in mind, that they have, sorry, not the rights, but they gain certain privileges to use your material if you enter it into the contest. And so it's important to note that if you're submitting a passion project, that you might be giving more control to Webtoon than you realize. And so this one to me seems like it was kind of made up on the fly. Reading it, it feels like a demonstration. It feels like a flex of what this creator is capable of, and I'll kind of show you what I mean by that. So this is an action fantasy series. It's about people that are members of a government military organization for those who have summoned an archfiend, and so that means that they have certain powers and abilities based on that archfiend that they must now use in order to keep the peace, in order to prevent people from summoning fiends accidentally, which might disturb that peace. And so overwhelming moments of negative emotion in this world can unintentionally summon a fiend, which can then wreak havoc. And so these archfiend wielders are there to keep the peace and prevent that from happening. Now, the story sets off with an interesting premise just based on that set of circumstances, but we start with an interrogation happening with our main character, Strudel, who is using his unique ability to relive a person's entire life and all of their experiences by kissing them. He's using this to determine if this other character is telling the truth, if she's lying to the interrogation. And this is actually a test on Strudel just to verify if his ability works and if it's useful, because the people interrogating her already know that she's lying. But one thing I noticed, that we start with a pretty interesting concept here, and we start with a decent cast of characters that are fairly well fleshed out despite being probably pretty quickly assembled. But something we do a lot of in the first few episodes of the series is jump back and forth between memories and the present, and I think that does a good job of keeping the pace high. It makes sure that even though we're going through this interrogation, we're going through this explanation where we work our way through explaining how everything works in this world, we're seeing it in the lens of action in a sequence that is very, very engaging and fast-paced, and so we never really have a moment to get bored. This does kind of create a confusing effect, though, where that sometimes it can be hard to tell when we've jumped forward or jumped backward, and so since we're constantly flipping between scenarios, it gets a little bit muddy at times, and it's hard to keep track of some of the characters because some of the faces are a little bit similar to each other, and since we don't know them that well yet, it's a little bit hard to keep track of everybody and maintain that cohesion where we're following the situation. And that's probably the biggest criticism I have for this series as a whole. It does action very well, and it keeps the pace very high. It's always moving. It's always pushing forward. There's a constant motion in every panel and every frame, and it really never slows down at all. And so that can be very exciting. That, really keeps the scenes rolling. It keeps things moving, and it maintains that flow of action. There's a constant motion. But at the same time, it can be kind of hard to sit back and process what's actually happening, and it's almost throwing so many things at the wall that you don't really have time to stop and think about them, to stop and grasp some of these concepts, and so it can be a little bit confusing, and there are times where you have to cycle back and reread a little bit just to get a grasp of what's actually happening. And so, although it does action very, very well, it's also just doing so much that it can be overwhelming at times. It almost needs to slow down and break that rapid pace a little bit more often and kind of give the audience time to catch up, give us time to process everything that we're learning, because here we are explaining the rules of the entire world and explaining the situation that we're in, the ideals that our characters have, and the conflicts that they're facing, and all of that is very well laid out. You do have the opportunity to learn all of that, but some of it gets lost along the way because it's coming out in the middle of these extremely rapid pace action sequences, and so we're moving so fast that it doesn't always give us time to let the information sink in, and so it can be a little bit confusing at times, even though it's clear that this was very well thought out and very carefully planned, and so that's just something to consider. But as I said at the beginning, I think that the primary purpose of this entry is to really just show what the artist is capable of, what they're capable of as a creator, and I do think that it does a very good job of that, because even though we don't spend very long in this world, there's only so many episodes in this, it does feel like by the time we get caught up on it, we have a good grasp of how this world works and how we're supposed to feel about it, and why we should be invested in the characters that we're following, why we should care about the things that they care about, and why they believe the things that they believe. And it does a very good job of setting that story up very quickly, almost too quickly, and again, just creating all of these scenarios. And so I think it does demonstrate very well what this creator is capable of, and it is very impressive in that right. I only wish that it took a little bit of time to slow down more often and just kind of let us get caught up as readers. Sorry, I didn't talk a lot about what the series is actually about. I think I laid out the base premise, but essentially it is about, yes, our main character, he has the ability that when he kisses someone, he lives all of their life experiences and is able to fully understand like everything that they've been through up to that point. And so we see how he uses that in unique ways to constantly maintain his advantage so that he can keep up with the situations that he's been thrust into. But then he's also fighting against these other characters that each have unique abilities on a similar strange level to what he's got going on. And so what it does is it shows the author's ability to create these wacky shonen style situations where we have characters with very, very unique powers fighting against each other and applying their abilities in creative ways. And I think that overall is the point. It's just, as I said, it throws a little bit too much at the wall at one time, and so we end with a big dramatic action sequence that spans multiple episodes, and we're constantly introducing new characters over the course of that and introducing new abilities over the course of that. And so it's ping-ponging back and forth so much between so many different things that the pace starts going and it never stops going. And so I think this is a very impressive entry. The art is very good, and again, the conveyance of motion, the conveyance of action is very, very good. It's one of the rare times where I'll say that I think the pace is a little bit too fast. Most of my reviews of these webtoons has been that they take too long to get to the point, that they drag on too long, they're too slow to set things up, whereas this one is a strange and rare example of the opposite problem. It sets everything up so rapidly and so effectively that it becomes overwhelming, but it does have a very, very impressive show of talent, and so I do think it's very well done, and I think that as an entry in the most epic category, it makes a solid contender for the short list. I really think that this has a good chance of going somewhere in the contest, and so I definitely wish luck to the author, and I am curious to see where it goes, because even though it is a lot to sit down and process, when you take the time to double back now and then and really ruminate on what's actually going on in it, when you take the time to actually understand what's happening in this series, it is very interesting and very intriguing, and I think that it has a lot of interesting ideas, and apparently there is a setup for at least 10 episodes, so we should be getting about 4 more on top of the ones that we have here as contest entries, and so I'll be very curious to see how we bring this story around to a conclusion. So yeah, very good job on this. And I do wish you luck. I think it's clear that you have what it takes to make an action webtoon, and especially one that is interesting, compelling, and engaging, and above all, exciting. So, good job on that. Okay, so next we're going to be taking a look at Tangled by LOR'YAH and Madam Scribe. It is a thriller action. I'll go ahead and read the description, and then we'll talk a little about it. So, in an ancient city built on the sands of time, Dinar stumbles upon a secret, one that may lead him to his missing father. Suddenly, he finds himself thrust into a dangerous game of intrigue, deception, and truths buried deep within the sands. As powerful forces conspire and whispers of the rebellion arise, Dinar must decide, will he play by the rules or risk everything to change the course of fate? Because in this city, time isn't just a form of measurement, it's survival. So, this is another example of a series where the description gives us actually more information than the episodes do, and so I'll try to talk a little bit about this, but it's difficult too because, I'm sorry, it kicked me back to the main page. Sometimes with mature series, it glitches and it sends you to the main page. But yeah, with this series, it spends a lot of time saying a lot of vague things that don't really elaborate much, and so it feels like we're given a hint at what it's about, but we never really get any hard confirmation on what's going on, and so a little bit too much is left open to interpretation, open to speculation. I feel like it doesn't really establish enough to where we can latch on to the idea or not. So it introduces a lot of concepts, but in a very vague way. And so I've said many times in these videos that I think that these contest entries should be kind of like a trailer for your series. You're trying to sell the reader on that series. You're especially though trying to sell the judges, the editors on your series. You're trying to make clear what type of series it is, what type of comic it will be, and what the tone for it will be, what you're capable as an author and as an illustrator. And this one has the visual side of things pretty well down. It looks very nice, but in terms of writing, it doesn't really give us enough to latch onto, and so it introduces some interesting elements, but it doesn't answer enough questions for us to truly understand what we're getting ourselves into. And so instead of a trailer, it feels more like a teaser trailer where it's just introducing vague concepts and visual style, but it's not really telling us what it's about. And so we see all of these characters, they've got these hourglass tattoos on their heads, and we end up with our main character being introduced here in the second episode, his father has been taken away from him, and he wakes up in a strange place, and he begins to explore the facility that he finds himself in, and he sees some strange things there that hint at what might be going on. There are people that are elderly lying in beds, and then he stumbles upon an hourglass of sands of time being collected, and so the implication is that time is being shaved off of people's lives and collected as some kind of resource. That seems to be what's going on, but it's never explicitly stated, and so we don't really get full confirmation on that, and we also don't really get much of an introduction to our characters, and so we know that this boy Duran is kind of our main protagonist, but we don't know a lot about him other than that he's looking for his father, whom he's been separated from, and he's kind of crawling around in this facility that he's not supposed to be running free in. And then we're introduced to what appears to be our main antagonist, who is the one that came up with the concept of collecting time in this giant hourglass, and he's making some kind of deal with a military figure for establishing more weapons. And so this all feels like setup for something, but it's not quite enough setup to really give us an idea of what we're getting into. So it does a decent job of establishing the tone. We know that things are unsafe here, something nefarious is going on in the background, but there just isn't quite enough. We don't really know where this story is going to go or what we should be looking forward to, and so I think it just doesn't do enough to set itself up. It's hard to speculate on where it might go because we're given so little information. This is a case where we definitely could use more information. So we've done a good job of setting a tone. We've done a good job of establishing our visual style and even introducing who our key players are, but we just don't know enough about them. We don't know why we should be invested in this boy other than that he's looking for his father. But who is he? I mean, what is his personality? What is his background? What are his goals? Why is he getting wrapped up in all of this? How did he escape? What unique skills might he have that aid in his mission to find his father? I mean, we don't really have enough, and so I think that it's clear that there's some talent here, but this is a case where the pacing needs to be a little bit faster. We need a little bit more information. So yeah, I think that this entry does do some things rather well, but it just feels like it's missing something. I will say that as a thriller action, as something that's listed in the most gripping category, it does do a good job of setting that gripping tone, that thrilling tone, and so that is commendable, and I am curious about where it will go. It's just kind of hard to speculate on based on these 3 episodes, so I would like to see what comes next for it. I look forward to seeing where it might go, what plans might be in store for it. So good job on that, definitely keep it up. But let's go ahead and have a look at our next one. That is going to be To Her Death by LOR'YAH. It is a fantasy drama. I'll go ahead and read the description and then we'll talk a little about it. So, after waking up on a mysterious island with no memories, Miri and her unlikely ally, a shady half-demon named LOR'YAH, are tasked with breaking the island's endless cycle of destruction caused by deadly pollution. The solution: Miri's sacrifice. So, this is another series where the description kind of gives us more information than the series does. So, these elements all seem to be alluded to in the episodes, but one thing I found with this one that it was a little bit hard to follow what was going on. So we open with a scene where Miri appears to be making some kind of pact with a demon. This is presumably LOR'YAH, who was mentioned in the description, and then we cut ahead to what appears to be a sequence of Miri being reincarnated and sent to this island. And we don't really know a lot about the island. We don't really get much about it, but she stumbles upon a boy in the woods who has wandered beyond the borders of safety. He's attacked by a demon, and then Miri, in a trance-like state, attacks and kills the demon. She is then taken in by some locals who are connected to the boy. And when she wakes up, they try to help her remember who she is, because after she's been reincarnated, she doesn't have any memory other than her own name, and so she is brought to the library of the island to kind of study some of the history of it, and maybe, hopefully in that course, remember something about her life. And there she finds a book that is apparently cursed, and anybody who touches it will die, and nobody who touches it is able to open it except for the author who wrote it, and nobody's able to understand what the title of it is or anything in it. And so Miri accidentally opens the book, but we kind of just brush that off and move on. So it sets up the implication that Miri is someone important, that she's somehow connected to the story of this island. But again, we get very little information about the island itself, where she's at, why there are demons here, what the nature of her powers is, and it feels like we're just missing some information, and I was a little confused reading it. I had to go back over it a couple times and like rewind a few times just to make sure that I didn't miss anything, because I felt like there was information that I just didn't have, but some of it's just not really there. So it feels like we need a little bit more time spent setting up the scenario that we're in. We need to know a little bit more about where Miri is at and why she might be here. And some of these things are part of the mystery that we're trying to build. We want to have that intrigue. We want the reader to be curious about them, but we also need to know a little bit so that we can be curious. You have to give enough information so that people want to know more, but not too much information to where they have no questions left to ask. And I feel like this errs on the side of not quite enough information, and so it does the fight sequence pretty well. It has a good visual style. It does all of the art very well, but the pacing leaves a little bit to be desired, and I just feel like in 3 episodes, we haven't quite learned enough to where we can really latch onto this series, and so a little bit more information, I think, is required here. And I do think that it's a good idea establishing this this cursed tome. Sorry, that's going to be a little bit forward ahead. Yeah, this here. So when Miri interacts with the book and then we find out that it has some connection to the broader plot, this tells us that Miri is someone important, that she's got a past that we don't understand, and we're going to find out how it all connects. And so that's a good example of like planting a seed, leaving a plot thread that we know we're going to explore later. I just wish that we had a better understanding of where we're at currently so that we could get a better feel for where we're going to be going. These types of hints are good to have. It's just that we never really took the time to explain the setting that we're in right now, and so it's kind of hard to think forward about the plot because we don't quite have enough about the present. And so I think that there's definitely something here. This is an interesting series with potential. I wish that I knew a little bit more about it. So definitely keep it up. I'll be curious to see where it goes and hopefully see some of the answers to a few of these questions. And I can't wait to learn more about this interesting setting that we find ourselves in this interesting story that Miri is being thrown into. So good job with that, and keep it up. Alright, next up we have got Rainy Day by Amber Blossom, and this is a supernatural drama. I'll read the description and then we'll talk about it. So it says, it seems like every day is a rainy day for Marie, an orphan who is constantly battling with her inner demons. Her continuous bad luck takes a turn for the worst when she is thrown into a life-threatening situation, only to be saved by none other than her own inner demon, Luke. But if her inner demon was real and making her life a living hell, then where was her guardian angel, and why weren't they the one protecting her? So, this is a good example of a description that tells us exactly what we're getting into. There's nothing in this description that doesn't come up in the series, and I think it does a good job of kind of summarizing what our base premise is here. So good job on that. Let's go ahead and dive into the series, and I'll talk a little bit about it. So the artwork is very good here. It's got a strong visual style. It does a good job of setting up scenes, and the characters are pretty well represented. It feels like we've got good, solid characters with pre-established personalities, so the character writing is pretty good here. My biggest concern is definitely with the pacing. So this is a story about a demon that, well, effectively he's new as a demon. He has recently died. His soul and entire being has been claimed by some demon queen for some reason, and she is now in charge of him. And in order to get his memories back, she is tasking him with doing her bidding, which is ruining the life of some random child. And so he's assigned to that, and if he does a good enough job, she's told him that she will give his memories back to him. And so his memories are being held hostage, and he's being tasked with being a demon in order to get them back. And so that's kind of our base premise. But I do think that with the way that this story is paced, we spend a little bit too long setting up the demon. And so 3.5 episodes are spent on this prologue section of our demon character wandering the afterlife and then being confronted with his new demon master, who is kind of explaining what his situation is and what she expects from him. And then we even have another character kind of come out and blatantly state in plain text the tragic backstory of our main demon. And so he doesn't know what his life was like, because all he remembers is the girl that he loved, but he doesn't remember anything that happened in his life other than that. And so that yearning to get back what he's lost of himself is what compels him to do the bidding of this demon master that he now must serve. And that's a clever device, because that creates curiosity in the audience. We're left to wonder, well, what type of life did he have? What type of person was he? What did he go through? And so it's kind of a strange decision to immediately pay off that curiosity to the readers and tell us in the 3rd episode every horrible thing that this guy dealt with and all of his tragic backstory. It kind of seems like normally you would pace that out a little bit. Like those are the types of things that we would find out slowly. They would come up later, but to just read it all in a big paragraph feels a little bit odd. It kind of feels like we've made the setup of him having that amnesia, of him not remembering anything, and then we instantly paid it off by just having another demon recount everything that he went through. And so it feels a little bit out of place, but there is an important piece of information that we get, which is that for all the suffering that our main character was subjected to, he wanted to go on to be he wanted to seek a career in helping troubled children like himself, to working with orphans and runaways and whatnot. And so that's important, because that is a detail that will obviously be relevant later, because he, as a demon, is tormenting an orphan girl, and she might even be an orphan as a result of his torment, because we don't really know what happened to her prior to her reaching the age that she's at in the comic. We just see the first introduction between our demon character Luke and the girl, which is when she's a baby, and so we don't know if she still has parents at that point or not, but presumably she does. And so anyways, the point being, it's kind of clear what the setup is there, that Marie is this very troubled child, and Luke is someone who, in his human life, wanted to help troubled children, but now, as a demon, he's being forced to torment them. But he doesn't know that, because he doesn't have those memories, and so there's a pretty clear setup for directions that this could potentially go. And I think that, again, the biggest issue that it has is just the pacing. It's a good idea, it has good characters, and it establishes good scenarios. It's good at building scenes and putting those characters together in interesting ways and setting up expectations for interactions that might happen. But it takes a little bit too long to get rolling, I think. That, see, as we're on episode 4, we're still essentially in the prologue, whereas I think that we probably should spend a lot less time on this section of the story, and the introduction of Luke to the girl that he's supposed to be tormenting, Marie, should probably come a little bit sooner, since it seems like that's more important to the story. And so Luke's interaction with the Demon Queen obviously matters. It's setting the stage for his character. It's building our investment in Luke as a character and kind of telling us everything that we need to know about him and why he's doing the things that he does. But I think that we spend a little bit too much time on it, and so it feels like we're setting up a different type of story, and then suddenly we pivot at the end of episode 4 to this point where now we're bringing in our human character. Now we're setting up the task that Luke has to complete. And so I think that starting closer to this point would probably help build investment and build intrigue. And then the backstory of Luke the demon is something that we could kind of explore later. If we start off with the human world and Marie not really knowing if she's being haunted by a demon or not, if she's just really unlucky or if there's something going on there, because she kind of suspects that something's there. She sees hints of shadows. She has a small amount of detecting Luke. And so if we start with that, where she's seeing things in the corner of her eye and not really sure like what's going on, that kind of builds that intrigue where we as the reader would wonder what's going on, wonder what's happening. But since we've spent 4 episodes on prologue, we already kind of know, and so it's like we've been given the answers to the mystery before we had the chance to even realize that it was a mystery. And I just think that rearranging the order of things a little bit might help us get more invested in the plight of the characters. And then, of course, we end with the hook in episode 6, where Marie finds herself in a life-threatening situation, as the description said, and Luke panics and saves her. And then the two kind of acknowledge each other for the first time. And that's where we leave off. And so part of the reason I say that we should kind of start closer to this point is that we really want to set the expectation for what the interactions between these two are going to be like. Will they start talking to each other after this point? Will Marie start to awaken Luke's protective side? Will they start to get to know each other? Will they become friends, or will Luke double down and just torment her further? Like, what kind of dynamic are these characters going to have? And what about that guardian angel, that inner angel that is hinted at in the description? Is that something that we're going to learn more about? Is that going to come up in the story at all? Those are the types of things that we would kind of want to see, because where we end off on this submission does build a sense of curiosity, but I do wish that we had a better taste of where this relationship between these characters is going to go. I very much look forward to seeing what comes next, but I do wish we had a little bit of a hint of a lead-in into that. What type of dynamic are they going to have? What type of story is this ultimately going to be? That's the type of thing that we really want to set up more. So while Luke's backstory is important to the story, I don't know if we need to know it right away. I think it might be better to build the framework for our story. So we know that Marie is, again, being troubled by a demon, but where is this going to go? Is she going to redeem this demon? Is her angel ever going to come into things? How are they going to interact with each other? That's the type of stuff that I just would like to see a little bit more of. But I think that this story has a lot of potential. It starts with a very strong premise, and it does a good job of building the characters and building our investment in them. So I think that all of the important elements are there, and that, again, it has a lot of potential. So good job on that, and I look forward to seeing where it goes from here, and I wish you luck. Alright, next up we're going to be looking at The Pillar. This is an action fantasy story by Blue. I'll go ahead and read the description, and then we'll look at it. In a world where magic is second nature, a tyrant rules with an iron fist. The Emperor, cruel, all-powerful, and consumed by his obsession with magic, crushes his people to ensure no rival ever rises against him. But Sho refuses to bow. With vengeance burning in his heart, he sets out on an impossible quest to slay the unkillable. Sho must outwit the Emperor's watchful eye and seize his one chance to strike. But is it possible to stand against a god? So, that's a pretty solid description for what's going on in this story, and I think it's very apt. That is effectively what we're getting ourselves into, and I have to say about this comic, it is very professional. The art is exceptional, the scenes are extremely well built, and it's very easy to follow what's going on. Everything is paced very well. We know immediately who our main character is. We know kind of immediately what he's up to, what he's doing, and what he's capable of. And we also are introduced to various concepts in this fantasy world naturally through dialogue. And so all of the rules are established by characters talking to each other in a way that informs the audience without feeling like it's contrived or out of place. And so this is effectively a masterclass in writing a comic. It's very, very good, and it also does a great job at creating these action sequences and having these cool altercations between the characters, and again, just kind of showing what is possible in this world and also what each character is capable of, and we know immediately what the stakes are as well. It's kind of hard to come up with anything critical to say about this. It's, again, exceptionally well done. It's very deliberately written, and the writing is very efficient, and so we learn everything we need to know as we need to know it, and there aren't a lot of lingering questions. It does a good job of setting up everything that needs to be set up and explaining this world to us, explaining the lore to us. And I think perhaps the only thing we're really missing is the motivation of our main character. We don't really know a lot about our main character, Sho. We don't really know why he wants to kill the Emperor, and that's probably the only thing that we're missing here. Is just why should we get invested in his quest? It's very easy to follow his journey. It's easy to root for him because the action sequences are so well done, and they do such a good job of, again, highlighting what the characters are capable of, what cool abilities they have, and how clever they are. And I do think that the plot is very clever. It shows that these are intelligent characters doing intelligent things, and they're all acting in their own best interests. They're not acting as puppets, as an instrument of the plot. They're doing things that make sense for them to be doing in the context of the world that they're in. And everything that happens in the comic is deliberate. It's all there for a reason. There's nothing out of place. There's nothing that's wasting any time. And so, as I said, it's very efficiently written. It would have been nice, though, just to, maybe have a little bit more of a hint at what Sho is after, why he's pursuing the Emperor, why he thinks that he should do this, why this is his quest. That's probably the only thing I could really say we don't get, is just a detailed look at like what the motivation is here. And that's the type of thing where we don't necessarily need it in these first 3 episodes, but if we're looking at this as an entrance in the contest, we're gonna want to know why we should be invested in our main character, why we should care about him, and what is his mission that we would want to root for him on. What are we getting on board with? And we could see that he's not necessarily a good person either, and that's also very interesting because, again, that kind of hints at who he is as a person and why he might be doing what he's doing. But a little bit more on the main character's motivation would be nice. Everything else is exceptional, though, and really my only concern with this comic, having read through it, is just it's so well done that I wonder, would the creator be able to produce work of this quality on a weekly basis, since that's going to be what Webtoon is looking for. But it's exceptionally well done. And all of the action sequences are very impactful, so yeah, it's kind of funny when a comic does a really good job, it's almost harder to talk about it. There's almost less to say because there's only so many ways I can commend it. There's only so many ways I could say that the action is good, the art is good, the scenarios are good, the characters make sense, and the writing is good. I mean, it's pretty much doing everything right, so very good job on that. I think this has really good chances of making it into the finals for the epic category. Out of the most epic entries that I've been reading, this is easily one of the better ones. And like, again, I think that odds of this placing in the top 10 for that category are pretty high because it's so well done. So good job on that. I definitely look forward to see where it goes. Alright, next up we're going to be looking at Supercat, which is a crime mystery romance by Soul the Soul Eater. I'll read the description and we'll talk a little about it. So, after emerging from a deep and prolonged sleep, Lexus discovers that she has been granted a mysterious gift by the demigod Zato. However, she is unable to recall the events that led to the bestowed power. As she grapples with daunting task of unveiling her family's shrouded history, an important question looms overhead. Will she embrace her newfound gift to unearth the truth, or will she allow the murky shadows of the past to prevail? So, reading this series, I'm not really sure why it's in the crime and mystery category, because it is competing in the most gripping category of the contest, but other than the main character having amnesia, we don't really have a mystery being set up, and we don't really have crime being set up, and I found this comic very difficult to understand. I couldn't really follow what was going on or why, and so our main character has been, she's connected to some kind of cat god that gives her cat powers, and presumably that's why it's called Supercat, but I don't really know what any of this is about. I really couldn't grasp what the narrative was trying to convey at all. So she wakes up in a facility surrounded by people that recognize her, and they all introduce themselves and explain how they're connected to her. Like, this orange guy is apparently one of her friends from high school, and he has a crush on her. And then we meet this red guy who is apparently her brother, and she doesn't remember any of them, and so they're kind of wandering this facility that they live in, just telling her various things about herself, trying to get her to hopefully remember, and that's all that happens. And so we don't really know where they're at. We don't really know why they're the way they are. Like, is it normal for our main character to be a echidna man? Is it normal for our other guy to be an orange man with a dome on his head? Like, we don't really explore any of that, and it's just really hard to grasp what this comic is trying to convey to us. And again, it's listed as a crime mystery romance, other than the implication that the orange character has a crush on our main girl. We don't really build any romance. And yeah, I think that what this comic could use is a little bit of a direction. What is it actually about? What are these characters doing in this place? Why should we be following them? What is the conflict? What are the journeys that they're going on? We need a little bit more information on this cat entity that's possessing our main character and why that matters. And I think we need to take a couple steps back and set up this narrative, because now we're spending 3 episodes just taking a tour of a facility and explaining to a character where the pool is at and the garage, and now we're going to introduce a car, I think, and talk about the different capabilities that it has. But I, as a reader, don't know why any of this matters yet, because we haven't set any of that up, and so it's really confusing. We need to establish our setting. We need to establish what our conflict is, what our characters' goals are, and why we should be invested in any of this. I have no idea what type of story this is or where it might be going, and I just think that there's some foundational narrative pieces missing. I feel like we've skipped ahead a few chapters, and there's something that we just haven't been told as a reader. There's something is missing here. So, here is our episode 3 hook. Our characters are in the garage talking about a car, and a wrench starts glowing. To be continued. And so, I don't really know where we're going from here. I don't really know what I'm supposed to get out of this, what I'm supposed to be latching onto and looking forward to, and yeah, it needs a little bit of work in the narrative department. So it seems like there's a lot of care put into these characters, and I think the author probably has a good understanding of who they are and what they're going to go on to do later, but we got to work on making sure that we're conveying that to the reader, because the way that this is paced it's very strange. Oh, sorry, I missed the like on the first episode. Let me go back and grab that. So yeah, we've done a lot of work establishing our characters, but we need to put some work into establishing the narrative. What is the story being told here? If it's a crime and mystery series, we need to introduce the crime or mystery right away. We need to let the audience know what is the crime that we are addressing here. What is the mystery that we're solving? We want to introduce that right away so that it is always on our minds. That way we can read into the plot and look for clues as to where it might be going. But right now it feels like it might be labeled under the wrong genre. At any rate, I wish you luck, and I implore you to continue with this and kind of extrapolate on some of these things and hopefully start answering some of these questions, and we can see what these characters go on to do. Next up, we're going to be looking at Fallen One by Netto Denetto. This is an action fantasy, and the description reads, Rihan, a human who spent his entire life in the realm of Jinn, once left for the realm of human to learn something. Things were peaceful before he left, but when he came back, the realm was no longer the same. So, that's a pretty vague description, but there's nothing in it that's inaccurate, so essentially, what is going on in this story is there is a fortune teller who is able to see the future, but when she dies, a hostile entity, a hostile group appears and starts to cause problems in the world of Jinn. They start kidnapping people, and nobody knows why. And so our main character witnesses one of these attempted kidnappings, and because he's personally slighted in the altercation, he jumps in and fights one of the attackers and ends up beating them up. And then we get a little bit of exposition as he talks to an old friend of his who kind of explains a little bit of what's going on. And so what I noticed about this series is that, for one, it does action very well, and it sets up the rules of the action very well. So it does a good job of teaching us like what types of abilities the Jinn have, what types of fights we can expect here, and how these things unfold, and kind of how these things work. And so yeah, very, very good with the action aspect of it. But what I did notice is that some of the wording in the comic is a little bit confusing. I think that there's a little bit that's being lost in translation. Like, it might need some grammatical corrections. It might need a proofreader to make sure that the translation is coming through well, that it's being conveyed clearly in English what the characters are supposed to be saying, because some of the dialogue just doesn't quite make sense, and it can be a little bit confusing at times. And there's also a little bit of not quite pacing issues, but sometimes the way the dialogue flows, it makes it hard to tell what the characters are talking about. And again, I think part of that is probably due to the translation issue, but it feels like the scenes kind of jump around a little bit, and so it seems like some details are maybe not being emphasized as much as they need to be, and so it can be a little bit confusing at times to follow what's actually happening, but I do think that it does the action very well, and it sets up a pretty cool character with our main character here and his abilities and all of that. So there's a lot good here. It just could perhaps take a little bit more time to set up its premise to kind of explain to us what is going on here and why our main character is involved in it, and maybe just slow down a little bit and help the reader kind of understand what we're looking at some of the time. But yeah, it does a good job with the action, and I think that the establishment of the main character is very strong. It leaves a lot of intrigue with the main character. Who is he? Why does he have the abilities that he has? Why is he able to do the things that he does? And we hint at what our villains, what our antagonists are up to, what they're trying to do, and why. And so there's a good framework being built here. It's just a little bit rough around the edges in terms of that framework, that storytelling, that pacing. There's just a little bit more information kind of setting up the plot would help. And again, a little bit of a improvement to the dialogue in terms of just the grammar and the translation so that it's easier to understand. But yeah, I did enjoy this one. I think it, again, it has good visuals, has very good action sequences, and it sets up fun types of action. I like the power system that it builds and the abilities that we see the characters use. I think all of that stuff is very good. So definitely a good job on this, and I am absolutely curious to see where it goes from here, how it develops. And we'll put a like on that. Yeah, good job on that. Keep up the good work. Alright, next we're going to be taking a look at Crystal Rose by LOR'YAH. This is a fantasy sci-fi. I'll read the description and then we'll dive into it. In this world, every Arch-alien person receives their crystal gift by the time they turn 15 to fight the Grulok. However, unlike her friends, Arya seems to have none. She wonders if it may be related to her accident 3 years ago, but decides to make the best of her situation. She celebrates with her friends after getting accepted to her school of choice. However, things take a turn when she encounters herself in the game. Secrets start to unfold, and will it be more than what she counted for? So, immediately, just reading the description, I'm already confused, and the comic doesn't really do a good job of making me less confused. So, we have this setup where reading this comic, I just wasn't really able to get an idea of what was going on, and let me explain. We'll roll through it, and I'll kind of talk about why I had an issue with it. So we start with our main character receiving her virtual reality headset for the first time, and she's putting it on and setting it up, and her friend warns her, hey, be careful putting that on. You're going to pass out wherever you're standing. You should be laying down when you do that. And then her friend teleports into her room and catches her to stop her from hitting her head. And so we have a world where there's magic powers in the real world, but our story seems to be taking place inside a video game with magic powers, and I'm not really sure what the connection is between the two. So it's a story about a virtual reality video game in a world where we already have magic powers outside the video game, and apparently people in the real world with golden eyes are born with powers from day one, and because they have powers so early, they aren't always able to control them, which can cause problems. And so our main character is told to hide her eye color, whereas other people without golden eyes will develop magic powers later, but our main character at some point 3 years ago got into an accident which caused her to lose her memory, and with her memory she also lost any powers she might have had, and now she's playing a video game where everyone has powers, but she encounters a younger version of herself inside the video game that looks like her from 3 years ago when the accident happened. And that's as far as we get. So immediately this is kind of confusing. I'm not really sure what this story is about. It's odd in a fantasy world with magic powers to add another layer of separation where we're now diving into a video game with magic powers, and we haven't really explained the power systems in either the real world or the video game. And so clearly with our character running into herself in-game, there's some kind of connection between the two, but I don't really know what that is. And it seems like there's a kind of a complicated story idea going on here, and I think we need to take a little more time to kind of set it up and establish what it's actually about and what type of story this is actually going to be. We don't necessarily need to stop and do a giant exposition dump, but we do want to make sure that the reader is able to understand what we're actually getting into. So yeah, there's just a couple of things like with the actual setup to this that maybe could be taken a little bit more slowly or delved a little bit more deeply into, because it comes off as kind of confusing, and then by the end of the third episode, nothing has really happened. So we're finding ourselves in a place where our main character, who has just stepped into this game for the first time, encounters this younger version of herself who is then attacked by a monster. And she tells the current version of herself to stand back while she fights it, and then that's where the whole thing ends. And so I just kind of feel like I'm lost in this. Like I haven't been able to follow it. I can't really understand what is going on, and I think that we need to take a more careful look at the story, at the setting, and building up that setting and kind of explaining what we're doing here. Why are we focusing on this video game? Is this a story about a video game, or is it a story about actual fantasy magic powers? And if it's about both, then we need to make the clear distinctions between the two and explain kind of why they're intertwined or why they're important. And I don't know, there's a lot going on here, but I kind of don't know how to feel about it. I feel like I just didn't understand it at all, so I would like to see more of it. I'd like to read future episodes of it so that I can hopefully start to gain an understanding of it, but I just feel like we didn't really explain enough of the setting in these opening 3 episodes, and so I just find myself very confused by it. But I think it looks pretty nice. The art was good, and there's obviously a lot of ideas in this. We just need a little bit of time to untangle them, so I shall look forward to seeing where it goes. Alright, next up we're going to be looking at Returned by Mifune. This is an action drama. I'll read the description and then we'll have a look at it. So, a demonic being emerges in the backyard of a single mother, forcing her and her child to take it in as part of their family. The real surprise comes when it takes on a peculiar human form, one that draws even more attention than its original appearance, turning all 3 of their lives upside down, for the better and for the worse. So, this almost seems like a comedy series. I don't really know what to make of it, because what the description says is what it's about. A mother is getting her son ready for school as she's scrolling through a dating app, and all of a sudden, a demon appears in their house, destroying it from underneath, and seems to be attacking them. And as the demon approaches the mother, it puts its hand on her head for a couple of seconds, and then after it removes its hand, she says to her son that she's actually had an hours-long conversation with the demon inside a separate plane of reality, where the demon told her that it's looking for a place to stay while it regains its power, and she agreed to let it stay with them. And then he takes on the form of the man that the mom was looking at on the dating app. And she gives him clothes, and he moves in with them. And then she sends her son to school, and she just goes to work, and they just leave the demon in their living room to hang out and drink beer and eat food and watch TV. And so that's what happens. And so right off the bat, I mean, this is an absolutely absurd premise, and it's presented in a way where it's so simplified that I can only assume it's meant to be funny. There's some jokes that are, interwoven in here, and so it kind of makes me wonder why it wasn't submitted as a comedy, because it seems like it's more of a comedy than anything else. But I don't know. It feels like it brushes over the details of the situation so quickly that it almost doesn't seem like it's meant to be taken seriously, and I'm not sure if it is or not, because again, we have the mom who has apparently had an hours-long conversation with this demon in a separate plane of reality, where it convinced her to let it stay in her house, but all of that happened off screen, and it's only mentioned in a couple lines of dialogue, and so we don't really know how this demon managed to persuade her, what they actually talked about, or anything like that. We get none of that information, and so it's like we're just meant to skip past that and move on. And so it feels like almost like a children's cartoon level of explanation, where this is just the situation and we're expected as the audience to accept it without thinking about it for even a second. And I can't tell if that's what we're going for here or not. It's very strange. Oh, sorry, I missed the like button. Let me go back and hit that. But yeah, like I said, the writing, the depth in the writing is that of a children's cartoon, but the artwork portrays the characters in a very, very overtly sexy way, like we're supposed to be ogling them. And so it's clearly not aimed at children, but it feels like it's kind of juvenile writing, and I don't really know what we're doing here with this. It's just a very, very strange tonal inconsistency where I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to get out of this. And so then we jump to our demon man, who's now living in the human world, and he's getting used to the human world, and he says he likes it. He realizes, wow, food is good, beer is good, TV is entertaining. But then he's confronted by an angel whom he gets into an epic fantasy fight with. And so presumably this is why it's categorized as an action drama. And I'm glad that at least it being in the action category, at least there's action in it, but there's so much going on here tonally that it's very confusing. It's a mix of a lot of different aspects, and it feels like we're brushing over the setup for this plot, and I don't know what to make of it. It's a fun idea, and it has fun moments, and it's got very good art and some very fun panels. I mean, there's cool action in it, but it's almost surreal how absurd the setup is for it, and I got to imagine that that's on purpose. I have to imagine that it's intentional. I'm not really sure what this is supposed to be, and so that's kind of the trouble, is that when it does so many different things and when it brushes past the setup and the lore so quickly, it just feels like it's several different genres blended together, but it doesn't really encapsulate any of them. And so I think it's doing a little bit too much here. I would like to know what conversation the mom had with the demon. I would like to know how they came to the deal that they came to. I'd like to know why the angels are hunting him. What is the conflict between the angels and demons? What types of powers do they have? What type of world is this? Yeah, I'm left with a lot of questions, and not the good kind of questions. And so even though it's fun to read, it's difficult to understand. Oh, sorry, I missed a like on the first episode. Let me go back and grab that, but... So yeah, for a bit of mindless fun, I think it does that well, but I don't think it sells itself as a series very well, because it's very, very tonally confusing. So I think there's something here. There's a good idea here, there's good characters here, and there's good humor here, but as an action drama, I wonder if it's in the right genre. But again, it blends so many genres that I don't really know what to make of it. But I wish you luck. I'll be curious to see where it goes from here. Alright, our last entry for this video will be LOR'YAH, Birth of the Abant'ellum. It's a fantasy story by Egedolf Dreemore. I'll read the description and we'll take a look at it. So, in the kingdom of LOR'YAH, the land of prosperity, everything was at peace. Princess Louise wandered the forest, chasing the thrill of a new adventure with her loyal guardian, Ka'aris, trailing silently behind. But her adventure was about to take an unexpected turn. Quotation marks, it's my first comic. So, I feel like I've been saying that a lot in this episode, but this story was very confusing. I think that there's an interesting artistic style, like it's got a good visual style, it looks very unique, and there's interesting scenarios being presented, but the way that this comic flows is very, very confusing. It's really hard to follow what is going on. And so I'll show you, for example, our opening scene here. We start with a butterfly flying into the kingdom, and then it lands on some kind of bear creature, and then it turns black and white, and now there's laughter, and now the creature's angry, and then we cut. Meanwhile, somewhere else. And so I'm not really sure what this is meant to be, but like this creature then comes back later as a monster, and so maybe the butterfly has done something, but it's so quickly sequenced, like we're so in and out with this that it's the first thing that we see of the comic, and we don't know what any of this means yet. And so it's just very confusing because it doesn't linger very long. Like, we aren't given time to even begin to speculate on what this might be, and then we jump into the forest where we have our characters, our princess with her loyal guardian walking in the woods, and a lot of dialogue. The thing I noticed immediately was I don't like this font. That might be a personal preference, but I felt like this font was kind of hard to look at. It was uncomfortable to read, and so it's very curved in a way, and so I prefer a font that's a little bit more straight up and down, because it feels like reading everything in italics, even though that's just the default for this font. And so that's just a nitpick. That's a personal preference thing, but I think that this font is kind of hard to read. It's uncomfortable to look at. But yeah, then we also, just again, we have pretty big walls of text for some of the speech balloons, and there are some very pretty panels, and the way they flow into each other is very creative and dynamic, but it's really hard to follow what's actually happening. So our guardian character humorously notices that his charge has gone missing. The princess isn't there, and, well, now what does he do? Well, he gets attacked by the wolf from the opening panel, I think. It looks like the same thing anyways, and so he's going to fight it with fire powers, and the fight scene, this is kind of what I mean when I say it's hard to follow what's going on. So this is our altercation between our main guardian of the princess and an angry wolf, a Blackheart, apparently. He throws his cape aside, and we have this scene where we only see him from the waist up, and the rest of him is just not rendered, and so it looks like he's submerged in water all of a sudden, but it's just kind of, again, like, it's confusing when you look at it because it looks like he's a disembodied torso, and we don't know why that would be the case, but like, that's obviously not what this frame is meant to convey, but it's visually confusing. And then, yeah, he throws his cape, it transitions into some kind of fireball attack, and now He's summoning some kind of weapon. Now he's disembodied in a wall of flames, and he's throwing all this fire around, but we've lost track of our wolf creature. Oh, there it is. It's against a black and white background. So immediately the question is, where is all of this taking place? Because we were in the forest a moment ago, but we don't have any establishing shots of this conflict, and so we don't know where the wolf is at in relation to our hero. We really want to make sure we're setting the scene when we have a combat sequence like this, because when you're having characters fight against each other and they're moving through physical space, we need to be able to follow where they're at. And so since we never have an establishing shot, we don't know how close the wolf ever even was to this guy, and most of our combat scenes are done zoomed in like this, so we're seeing him swirling around and fire around him, but we don't actually know what he's really doing other than that there's a lot of fire. And it seems like it hits the wolf. I can't tell. I know we've got this diving attack happening, but then a volcano explodes, and it's just it's really hard to follow what's going on. And now we have, I think this is the body of the creature that he's slain, and there's an essence coming out of it, and it's one of those butterflies, and he says, this black heart gave birth to a white heart, light born from corruption, or is there something entirely new? Weird, but anyway, and then we just move on, but we, the reader, have no idea what that means, and so we don't really understand what we're looking at or what we're talking about, and it's very confusing, and I found that all of the episodes were pretty much like that, just really hard to follow and hard to understand, and so I could kind of tell what it was going for, but I think it just doesn't do a good job at building the scenes and making it clear to the reader. Like, we need to make sure that it is visually comprehensible, that we can visually understand what's going on. Something else that stood out to me with this story is the way that the fantasy terminology is thrown around. It's just, we're being bombarded with this wall of fantasy terms, and we don't get explanations for what most of them mean, and so we don't really know what we're actually talking about here. And so it's clear that this was made with a lot of creativity. There are a lot of ideas here, there's a lot of lore here, but we, the reader, don't know what any of that means. And so when we're just throwing all these terms on screen, it's overwhelming because we don't have time to step back and understand any of them. And I've also noticed that most of our fantasy words just have apostrophes in them for some reason, and it's kind of hard to tell how we're meant to read that. So I'll kind of show you what I mean here. There's a good example in one of these frames in the second episode. So yes, here we are. So, I, Zeneris, Queen of LOR'YAH, shall cleanse this darkness and banish it from LOR'YAH by the will of Voldo. And so we're just being overwhelmed with all these fantasy names and terms, and like, we haven't really been given the chance to actually learn what they mean yet. And as for the scenario here, this is the queen in the throne room, which is now being attacked by a beast of massive proportion, and so she transforms into combat mode to then fight against it, and so do apparently two of her guards. And so we cut to this sequence where we've got the queen fighting alongside two of her comrades, and we're making like humor sequences amidst this, and it's just, again, it's just very hard to understand. It's really hard to follow, and I can't tell what's actually going on. And so I could see kind of what we're going for, but I just think we're not doing a good job of conveying the scenes here. We need an establishing shot, because we never see the queen and the monster she's fighting in the same frame. And so we don't know what the scale actually is. They say that it's very large, but because we never see them next to each other, we don't actually know how large it is. And then this guy appears. They beg him for help, but he doesn't want to help, and so the queen starts threatening to reveal his embarrassing secrets. And there's this elongated sequence of back and forth with tons of dialogue about this. It's just really confusing because all of this is happening in the middle of a high-stakes combat sequence where a giant monster is threatening the entire kingdom, and we're stopping to make jokes at this character's expense, this character that we haven't met until now. So, yeah, we really got to work on the pacing of this and kind of like slowing this down and really explaining what the narrative is here, what these terms mean, what these systems mean, how this magic works, and who these characters are. It just feels like a sequence of things happening rapid fire with little context for what's actually going on, and so it's very confusing to read. I really came away from it understanding very little of it, and I think that there's a lot of interesting ideas here. There's obviously, again, there's a lot of creative force behind this. It's a very unique world with unique magic and monsters and whatnot. I think we just need to take a little bit more time kind of laying all of that out and explaining it to the reader and pacing it out, and also building our scenes in a way that the reader can understand what's going on in the scene, where the characters are in relation to each other, and why everybody is doing the things that they're doing. And this third episode, we go into a lengthy discussion between our princess and the bunny that has taken her away from her knight. And here we do kind of, this is a bit of an expositional sin. So the bunny asks the princess to explain what she knows about the world, and so she explains the entire creation myth of the pantheon of gods. And then the bunny tells her, no, that's wrong. And then the bunny explains an alternate creation myth of the same pantheon of gods. And so now what we've done is, back to back, we have hit the reader with two different explanations of the history of the world. And this is a lot of information at one time. And so we're going to get the details confused, and it's going to be too hard to dissect any of it. It's too much information at once, and we're getting conflicting stories from different characters, and so like we don't know what's true or not by the end of it, and it's just too much. It's very, very confusing. So yeah, I think the visual style is very interesting, and I think that there are a lot of interesting ideas here, but we've got to work on the writing with this. We've got to work on the pacing and the storyboarding as well. So storyboarding, making sure that we're laying out a scene in a way that it's easy to visually understand. And now I will again point out, though, that the author does say in the description, this is their first comic, and as a first comic, it does do a lot of things well. It does a lot of things right, and so it's a good first attempt, and I think that if you continue to develop this idea, if you continue to work on it and improve on it, I think that there is definitely something good here. So good job, and keep it up. I wish you luck. Alright, that is our 10th entry. I was hoping to come in under an hour, but we've gone long again, so sorry for that. But now's my chance to shill my own entry, so if you enjoyed any of this commentary, whether you agree or disagree, you can consider checking out my comic, Dumpster Girl. It's about a ghost and some garbage. If you're into horror thrillers, I'd appreciate it if you give it a look, give it a read, and let me know if you like it. I basically finished it at the last second and turned it in, so there's a lot that I would have done differently. There's a lot that I wish I had done better, but I'm pretty happy with it in the end, I guess, and, well, we'll see what happens. Anyways, I have got countless more comics to review, and so, oh goodness, yeah, just in the time I've been recording this, we've got another one added to the list, so I think... How many do I still have, actually? Got around 30 remaining, so it's going to take us a while to get through these, but I am going to review everything that gets submitted to this Reddit post, and I will read all of them, and so I will keep at it. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you in your nightmares.